On the 18th of July, something terrible began in Moscow as well.
Wow. Oh my God! A residential complex, heart of the capital, Moscow city. There was such an explosion here just now. Oh my goodness. Wow. Unbelievable. The asphalt just cracked here.
The GUR carried out a brilliant special operation in Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, and Kaliningrad.
In short, something just blew up. The vibration was just like from a drone. Everyone woke up. Right now, we don't even know which tower got hit. A drone? Yeah, it almost hit us. The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin urgently convened the Security Council. The blast was so strong it just blew the clothes right off. I was in shock. No thoughts at all in that moment. I ducked down right away because I realized something had hit. The drones were somewhere above me. Right above me. Something's flying in over there. Do you hear it? There's a drone somewhere over there. Look, look, look.
The AFU are attacking the enemy's tactical and strategic aviation at the airfield in the Voronezh region, a drone manufacturing plant in Tatarstan.
Rulushi.
And they are carrying out the air defense system in occupied Crimea feet first.
That's wild.
On the 18th of July, Moscow City is being evacuated.
Basically, something exploded.
The US has authorized strikes on Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Kremlin.
I'm coming back to life.
President Trump is openly suggesting that Zelensky strike Moscow and St. Petersburg. These missiles are already on their way. JASSMs and Tomahawks are capable of hitting targets in the center of Mordor's capital. Against the backdrop of drone strikes, there's an evacuation from Moscow City. Russian companies are sending people en masse to work remote. Sobyanin is shooting down drones with his bare hands. Aviation collapsed at Moscow and St. Petersburg airport. There's panic and evacuation there. All of this is a new phase of the war and the end of the Kremlin's illusions. Today we're discussing this with Ruslan Kutaev, president of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus. This video is about the fear of Moscow, the fear of the Kremlin, and the fear of everyone who realizes that now anything is truly possible. For the first time since the war began, a direct statement was made. Moscow could be struck if the US provides missiles. And it's not just about the American JASSMs, which have a range of over 1,000 kilometers, but above all, about Tomahawk's long-range systems capable of hitting right at the heart of Mordor's capital. That's precisely why there's an evacuation from Moscow City. Employees are being asked to work remotely. The Kremlin is trembling not because of words, but because of signals. And today, those signals are coming through very loudly. What happens next? We'll discuss this with Ruslan Kutaev, who knows firsthand what pressure on the elites and fear at the top are like.
Dasha, greetings to you. Greetings to our esteemed viewers.
Ruslan Kamitic, what do you think about the evacuation of Moscow City? What do you think about the huge number of employees being sent to work remotely so they don't get hit, so the center doesn't get hit, so they don't get caught in the crossfire?
We need to explain a little bit to our viewers. The thing is, the Russian special services placed UAV operators in those office centers who were preparing. All those bots were being prepared there, the ones that spread and continue to spread information. This is the troll factory that Prigozhin created in St. Petersburg. All this arsenal was relocated, transferred to Moscow. And these were mainly the very people who spread lies, who slandered Ukraine and the entire civilized world. Of course, they got scared. Frankly speaking, yes, that's right, Dasha. You're giving the correct information. About 20% of them have been left there. And even then, they will only be there during the daytime. As a rule, Ukrainian drones arrive at night. We should tell our viewers that they operate around the clock. In other words, they spread their nonsense, this criminal false information 24 hours a day. And naturally, they also work around the clock in the direction of Russian drones, Russian unmanned aerial vehicles. Well, you see, now Budanov and Maliuk have adjusted their work schedule. They've put many of them on a more flexible, let's say, time regime. They can practice the craft at home or wherever else they like.
Friends, please like this video and write a few kind words to our tender. Ruslan Kutaev and I go live several times a week to discuss current events. Now, the main question is, how will Moscow respond to Tomahawks, JASSMs, and other missiles and drones that will be heading toward Moscow and St. Petersburg? Daily drone attacks, the carpet plan in Moscow and St. Petersburg airports, and the fact that the aviation industry has simply lost billions of rubles. Ruslan Kutaev, how do you generally feel about the ongoing drone attacks on Moscow and St. Petersburg? About the fact that there is a constant aviation collapse at Pulkovo, Vnukovo, and Sheremetyevo airports. They sleep on the floor for days, lose huge amounts of money economically, and even as a consequence, despite the underlying corruption, but in the end, whether by natural causes or not, the former Minister of Transport has died. What do you have to say about this?
Well, to be honest, this is a philharmonic. When you look at the scenes of Moscow airports being overcrowded with people packed together like sardines in a can, literally pressed up against each other, standing shoulder to shoulder. And all this goes on not for just 1 or 2 days, but sometimes for several days in a row. And when this continues for weeks on end, it brings great pleasure. And of course, we view the actions of the Ukrainian side, the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Ukrainian special services in a complementary way, because there in Moscow, Muscovites, Russians should find themselves in the same situation that Ukraine and Ukrainians have been in for 3.5 years, constantly being shelled, shot at, and killed around the clock. This needs to increase. We know that all the prerequisites are there for this to increase, and indeed what Trump said has become public knowledge. To be honest, I carefully analyzed their behavior for a day, a little more than a day. They were just, excuse me, completely stunned. They didn't know how to react. They were all just deflated, these propagandists, and the risk until some directive came from Kirilenko's administration about what to do next. And they adopted the directive that they would ignore what Trump said and just continue with their actions. But here, both the military and political leadership confirmed it. We know that they continue to use everything in their arsenal to attack Ukraine, Kiev, and Ukrainian cities. So it means they've taken this position, but we know that 50 days is really a long time. It's a long period, especially for those who are being attacked, who are under assault by Russian terrorists. And that's why they're now trying to pressure Trump. Trump gave 50 days. He's blackmailing Putin, putting pressure on him. That's the kind of game they are playing with him. But unfortunately, this game ends up hurting innocent people in Ukraine. Well, let's hope that from this situation as well, without a doubt, of course, I have no doubt that Ukraine and Ukrainians will come out of all this with dignity. For now, it's hard to say what decision the American or Russian side will make regarding how they will act. They will keep playing, but we know one thing for sure. The crucial thing to understand is that this particular negotiator, who is very close to former President Donald Trump, a man named Kirilov, was his full last name again. I seem to have momentarily forgotten it. Yes, it was Kirilov, Dmitry Kirilov to be precise. He immediately made a statement after Trump acted rather tough, saying that the Russian side understands Trump, understands the Americans, and that we accordingly will act according to the situation as it develops. And he said that he is full of hope that America and Russia will eventually come to an agreement and that they will achieve peace. So at this point, I wouldn't venture to make any predictions. It's a very unclear matter. It's unlikely that any expert could do so because Trump's behavior is unpredictable. Putin actually believes that he caught Trump like a goldfish on a hook long ago. And basically, all this time, he's been manipulating him however he wants. He controls him. He twists Trump around his finger. Let's be honest, however he wants. Whatever Putin does, Trump, on the contrary, goes along with him and keeps doing so. But now there's a pause. Let's hope, as he promised, that the defensive weapons, specifically those Patriots he promised, will be delivered to Ukraine. And let's not forget about the missiles he mentioned with their extended range. Trump himself suggested, no matter what he says, Norway told Zelensky, Volodya, why don't you bomb St. Petersburg and Moscow? Because that was probably in a fit of anger at Putin. I think the situation will continue to escalate. I think it will be interesting not because Russia will be ramping things up, but because Ukraine will be responding. Every day we see new technologies. Dasha, you and I have always talked about this. The new technologies that Ukraine is developing and that are being supplied to Ukraine by the West and the United States as well, give us every reason to hope that we are indeed moving toward victory. As for the death of the Minister of Transport, well, my opinion and perspective is that this was a demonstrative, symbolic killing. It's a reminder to the other members of the government, to the governors, to those people whom Putin for the past 25 years has allowed to do whatever they want to steal and act with complete impunity. He most likely gave them a signal, told them or passed on the message himself, saying that money is needed now, and money really is needed. Putin doesn't even have the money today to finance the front. Everything has failed, everything has collapsed. They thought they could hold out until the very end, until the money ran out, but there is no money. And now they have to invent and come up with something. I think we will still witness someone trying to escape. Some will run away, some will be killed. The infighting has already begun, let's say, among the second tier. It hasn't reached the first tier yet, Kiryenko, Patrushev, or Bortnikov. But the second tier includes ministers and governors. I think the infighting with them has already started, and they are already, let's put it this way, being dealt with quite specifically, and they're being shaken up pretty thoroughly, in my opinion.
Ruslan Kutaev, Senator Lindsey Graham's statement was very telling when he said, "I would suggest asking Ayatollah Khomeini what happens on the 51st day." Thus, Lindsey Graham is hinting that America, certainly not directly, but most likely through the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, will be able to attack targets that are close to Russia's nuclear triad. We're not necessarily talking about launchers right now. We're talking about fleets, yes. There's the Northern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet, and nuclear facilities in Crimea. I've analyzed that there are nuclear facilities and infrastructure in occupied Crimea like Feodosia, which has a radioactive waste storage site, Sevastopol, a base for nuclear submarines, and now Novorossiysk. Then Novorossiysk can be attacked. There's Kazakya Bay, a restricted area, Balaklava, a former base with nuclear warheads, and the airfields of Havardisk and Saki, from which enemy strategic aviation can take off. So essentially, you could say that America, in the person of Lindsey Graham, hinted to Putin that his nuclear triad could be attacked on the 51st or 52nd day. What do you think?
It could be anything. Web 2, Web 3. Ukraine has these capabilities, but the most important thing here is something else. I want to draw our viewers' attention to this. Very few people have actually thought about this. At one time, Trump warned Iran and said, 60 days, I'm giving you 60 days to resolve this issue, this disputed issue. And the attack by Israel was carried out precisely on the 61st day. In other words, Trump waited out the 60 days despite his, let's say, lack of seriousness on many issues, at least in this case, regarding the deadline set for Iran. Trump stuck to it, and most importantly, he did so successfully. The Americans attacked the nuclear facilities and nothing happened to them. Trump is triumphant. Trump announces to the whole world that he has won. Whether he stopped the nuclear, stopped it or not is another question. But the most important thing is that Trump did it and he succeeded. Now, being, let's say, on this note of victory from the previous deadline he set, he is currently very determined. The 51st day is a very significant number for Russia, and everyone is already talking about it. The 51st, he gave 50 days. And we'll see on the 51st day how he behaves. And here you were right, Dasha. This isn't a case where American aviation will come and bomb some Russian targets. No, it will be the glorious Ukrainian army that does it. It will be the glorious Ukrainian special services. We don't know how they'll do it, but we know that they will. That's the key point. We know that Ukraine will do it. And most importantly, Russia knows and Putin knows that Ukraine will do it. They are capable of doing this and getting it done, especially if there is support from the United States of America, and even more so if there is a need to fulfill Trump's promise. In that case, America will show some initiative and will surely throw in some kind of weapon that hasn't been used before. So our expectations are very good, truly promising expectations.
Ruslan Kutaev, Zelensky has stated that he is discussing a mega deal on arms sales with Trump. In an interview with The Post, Volodymyr Zelensky said that his last conversation with Trump was about an agreement under which the US and Ukraine would support each other in the development of aerospace technologies, and that both sides are discussing a deal involving the purchase of American weapons in exchange for the sale of Ukrainian drones. This is a mega deal. We, the American people, need these technologies. They should be in your arsenal. I think it's a mega deal, as they say, a win-win situation for both sides, President Zelensky stated. And what does this mean in practice, Ruslan Kutaev?
In practice, this means that the Ukrainians have advanced further than anyone else Israel, the United States of America, China in the field of drone development and unmanned aerial vehicle engineering. In fact, Ukraine has always been at the forefront in terms of military and engineering thought during the Soviet Union era. It's no coincidence that shipbuilding, engines, and that engine manufacturing plant are in Mykolaiv. That says a lot. These are highly skilled and top-class specialists. Unfortunately, due to well-known events and reasons, Ukraine, for a time in the 1990s, slowed down its economic development, its engineering thought, and the emergence of new ideas and technologies. But now there's a breakthrough, and we can say that with confidence. And that's why I actually like Zelensky's approach in this regard. Lately, Ukraine isn't so much asking for weapons as they are asking for technology and joint ventures to produce military products, military equipment, ammunition, and so on. That is what tomorrow, the future, is all about. And now the Americans are realizing and understanding that Ukraine has excellent engineering talent, which is in no way inferior to that of Israel, China, or the United States. And that's why the Americans themselves are now offering to work together with Ukraine. And all of this should yield very good results. So we can only welcome this. And we are glad that things are moving in this direction.
Ruslan Kutaev, now let's talk about the Senate. We see that the Senate was ready to impose sanctions by the end of July, but due to Trump's negative stance, this was postponed until September. Ruslan Kutaev, do you think that Trump gave Putin the opportunity to launch a large-scale offensive during these 50 days? Because there is already information ported by all the world's media that Putin is preparing 160,000 Russian troops for an advance, for a new wave of offensive actions on Ukrainian territory. He will be doing this over the next 50 days. Perhaps this was indeed a deal between Trump and Putin. So in this way, did Trump allow Putin to occupy territory over the next 50 days?
You know, Dasha, I don't want to deceive myself. I equally admit that Trump could have done this, I'm not insisting on it, but I allow for the possibility that this could have happened. They could in principle have come to an agreement and Putin says to him, well, give me 30 days. Trump says, I'll give you 50 days. Here are 50 days, settle all your issues. Basically, it could have happened this way, but it could also have been different. In the end, Trump's entourage, they eventually tell him, this self-absorbed Trump, who loves himself to an unbelievable degree, they say, they're making fun of you. The Russians are mocking you. On their propaganda shows, they're dragging you through the mud like some country bumpkin. And Putin is manipulating you however he wants. And so maybe that's why he got angry. Here, both options have a right to exist. But we can't rule out that Trump might have made this deal with Putin. Well, fine, I'll give you this last term, your 50 days. Go ahead, try it and see what you can do. If we consider these two options, right now, I'm still inclined to think that's not the case, that it's not so, because for the first time, notice, Dasha, for the first time, he used to refuse to sell weapons to Ukraine. The Europeans had long been suggesting, sell to us. Another very important detail, none of the experts seem to mention this for some reason, is that Trump never allowed for any kind of support, any kind of assistance through other countries, through NATO, to exist at all. Now, all of this was built, through European countries, that is, through the EU. But here, in the latest decision that was made, Trump says, through NATO countries. This is also a kind of breakthrough, indicating that Trump has changed his mind. At the very least, he is now willing to sell weapons. That's all we need. Europe has collectively gathered 800 billion euros in order to successfully arm itself establish joint ventures for the production of weapons, modernize existing ones, and supply Ukraine with the necessary volume and proper quality. And that's why here I still prefer to think that Trump is offended by Putin, and that's why he acts this way. But at the same time, I also allow for the possibility that, say, this position that they could have come to an agreement. You can expect anything from Trump, and you always have to keep your guard up with him.
Ruslan Muhamedovich, now let's move on to two important topics. This is the 18th package of sanctions, but we'll save that for the end. And now the hellish sanctions against Russia that the Senate might vote on in September. 100% tariffs for countries that buy energy resources from Russia. So just yesterday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned that countries like Brazil, China, and India could suffer greatly from secondary sanctions if they continue doing business with Russia. And here's the news. India is confident it will find an alternative to Russian oil if US sanctions are imposed. This was stated by Oil Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, according to Reuters. Ruslan Muhamedovich, so we understand that as soon as the Senate imposes secondary sanctions against countries that buy Russian energy resources, India and other countries doing business with Russia will abruptly stop. And the head of the president's office, Andriy Yermak, has already stated that if the Senate imposes sanctions in September this year, the war could end this year. And now the main question, Ruslan Muhamedovich, will the Senate actually impose these sanctions?
That really is the main question. Everything depends on Trump's behavior. I want our viewers to understand the Republicans, both congressmen and senators, are tied to Trump. Much to their regret, even the Reaganite wing is tied to Trump. If they openly go against Trump, then they face a significant risk of not being re-elected to the chambers, the upper and lower houses of the United States Congress. Purely out of self-interest, to ensure they're re-elected to both the Senate and Congress, they behave this way. We know that even the vast majority of Republican senators and congressmen hold a pro-Ukrainian position. Even MAGA, which is Trump's platform and foundation, they went against him. And here we can safely count on, let's say, this ideological split they have. Now, we're not going to get into that Epstein, their behavior. Well, let's say we don't need that today. In our show with children, there's pedophilia and so on. I think we won't get into that, but Trump is in a difficult situation. So it could turn out that Trump's position will become so weak that he won't be the one setting the tone, but rather the congressmen and senators will. I assure you, if things turn out that way, they will support these sanctions without batting an eye. And of course, they will go for it with great enthusiasm and eagerness. 85 out of 100 people, Congress US senators, openly say they are in favor of imposing these sanctions. And here you were right to say, India will immediately slip off the hook. Don't think so. I'm convinced China will not buy Russian oil for Russia's sake if it means risking, let's say, falling under sanction. And especially oil, they already have it. I mean, China buys 70% of Iran's oil. China has a choice to bail out Russia and put itself at risk. China won't do that. So as for Brazil, why would Brazil need this when Venezuelan oil is right at hand and so on? So in this way, we can confidently say that if these sanctions are imposed, this last source of income, the funding for the war, without exaggeration, well, I won't say it will be completely cut off, but it will be very seriously limited. And in this case, the economy is already collapsed and at rock bottom will fall apart even further. Pensions will stop being paid, students will no longer receive their stipends, and so on. And all of this will quickly escalate and spill over to the front lines when there is absolutely nothing left to pay those whom they've now forced onto the front.
Ruslan Muhamedovich, regarding the European Union, they still can't manage to vote on the 18th package of sanctions. They keep postponing it, supposedly until the end of this week. We're going on air on Friday, and I think they'll be considering all of this closer to the evening and beyond. In other words, they need to bring the price of oil per barrel down to $45, but so far they haven't managed to do. Slovakia is blocking this issue. Do you think they'll eventually be able to vote on the 18th package? And is it possible that August, which has always been a difficult month for the Russian Empire, I call that country?
Historically, yes.
Yes. And so, for example, if sanctions in the form of, if the European Union introduces a package of sanctions and the Senate imposes sanctions as well, basically everything will collapse. What do you think?
You know, Dasha, I think it's not so much. Although Fico and Orban are playing their Judas roles here, especially Orban is really going out of his way to help Russia and trip up Ukraine. He has such hatred toward Ukraine and Ukrainians. I think it will come back to him 100-fold, absolutely. So I think that ultimately the behavior of these two Orban is definitely connected to Trump. This is Trump's attitude. I think it was Trump who pressured the Europeans and prevented these sanctions from being imposed. We remember the last time they met, and it was right before this. And in fact, that's why Europe postponed things until after the meeting when they met at the European G7 or G8 summit end here. Trump really expressed his wishes and openly imposed his attitude on Europe. I think this will pass as well. And if Trump's current attitudes remain in line with this, and in the end he stops looking back at Putin and Russia, then these sanctions will go through. I'm sure somehow, I'm always convinced that the Europeans will find an approach to these two European troublemakers who are stirring things up over there. Remember when Europe wanted to adopt another round of sanctions, Orban was blocking it, and then the former German chancellor asked him, go take a walk to the restroom. And in his absences, you can vote when someone is absent, they voted and passed it. They can do exactly the same thing now. Merkel now, she could send him not just to the restroom, she could send him anywhere she wants. This guy is very determined to support Ukraine. And that's why I still think the main reason lies in America and in Trump. And I still believe and am convinced that in the end, of course, Europe will adopt these sanctions. I think these sanctions are close. And as for the procedure to get around the mood of these two gentlemen, if you can even call them that, Pfizer and Orban, they will find a way and there will still be progress. I have no doubt that both America and Europe will adopt them and everything will move forward. There's really no doubt about it. Because, well, historically, the situation is such that America is destined for this. There's no way it can run away from Ukraine. Even if Trump tries to run away, I've always said this a year ago and after he came, if he runs away, he'll end up coming back to Zelensky and asking to be let back in. Because his political future and that of the Republicans is tied to Ukraine and to Ukraine's victory. And that's why Ukraine isn't asking for anything. They're simply saying, sell us weapons, we'll develop your weapons, we'll improve them technologically. Today, we see Trump making an offer to Zelensky about what they've improved. Let's share technologies. This is the truth. This is the reality of life. And neither Trump nor Zelensky nor anyone else can escape it.
Dear audience, Ruslan Muhammadievich and I work for you several times a week, so every like, every comment, and every subscription is invaluable to us. Like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. I give likes and hearts to viewers from different locations. Thank you very much. President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus, Ruslan Kutaev. Ruslan Muhammadievich, thank you. And as always, see you next week.
All the best. Take care. Until next time.